Kia ora, Prime Minister.
Kia ora, good to be with you.
Thank you for sitting down with us. 1 year in, 4 quarters down, to borrow your parlance.
You're picking up the jargon.
What have you learnt?
Oh, look, I've learned what a tremendous privilege it is to do this job. I generally wake up each day going, what a great honour it is to do it. You're very conscious of the burden and the responsibility as well of trying to do your very, very best at all times. Doesn't mean you get it right all the time, but you do your very best in order to make things move forward for the country. And so, I came to politics because I believe in this country. I think we've got a fantastic future ahead of us, and I want us to realise that potential, and that's been my motivation for coming in 4 years ago, and it remains my motivation doing this job.
Still fresh to politics though. So what are your lessons shifting from that corporate world to the world of politics? What have you learned about politics?
I think
managing cabinet, managing a coalition.
Yeah, that side of it is actually very similar. It's about leadership, and it's about, if you think about my journey, essentially coming into politics in 2020 after a really bad election result, a year later probably being in a slightly worse shape, and then taking over the leadership of the party in the condition that it was. A lot of that, how you build teams, how you get the people in the right places, how you motivate them, how you work with them. We did that very, very effectively in changing the culture of the National Party and getting the best out of all the players that we got. We decided it was a team sport, not an individual sport. And so all of that stuff is very, very transferable into the job. I was also very privileged in the sense of I got to see former Prime Ministers doing this job up close. So I sort of came to the job knowing the reality of it and what's involved. And also because of the nature of the jobs I've had, I've been used to always having big work loads and lots of travel and being busy from my 20s. So that side of it has actually not been a challenge at all. And then working in a coalition government, again it's the same skills of how do you use the talents and the people that you've got in the government and put the right ministers on the right assignments and get the best out of them. So
that's what you knew. What have you learnt?
Yeah, I mean, what I've learnt is, what I've learnt is just, that there's a lot of challenge, in the job. The hard stuff comes your way, but that hasn't been surprised. There's no real surprises for me doing the job, but certainly there's been some real challenges. The economic challenges have been profound. And how you wrestle through very difficult issues with often incomplete information to get to the right long-term decision has been important.
We can talk a bit more about the economy a bit later on, but first the classic anniversary question. If you could do this year again, what would you do differently?
I don't think there's much I'd do differently. I don't mean that in an arrogant way, but I think we came to the job having done the work in opposition about what we wanted to achieve, and so we arrived with maximum clarity about the challenges ahead of us. And I'm sure there are things that I could have communicated differently or better, but really, that's always the case, and I think that's on the margins. But I think the way that we've hit government is very different from how I've observed it being run in the past. We have very clear targets and goals, which are proxies for the way in which we will deliver things for New Zealanders and actually improve them. New Zealanders, quite rightly, over all the rhetoric, they want us to deliver, and they want a government to try to do things differently. And I think we've started with that mission in mind right from day one, from our first cabinet meeting when I said to the cabinet, eventually, the only regrets we'll have when these jobs come to an end is that we weren't bold enough and we weren't fast enough. Yep, and I mean it, because that's why we're here, and we don't just do politics for the sake of politics, and we don't want to just be another government that boils the ocean and doesn't really deliver anything. And so that's why we're running it differently in the way that we are.
What about your handling of the cancer drugs promise? How would you handle that differently, the cancer drugs promise?
Oh, look, I think there was a communication challenge initially around the budget period in particular, but I'm very proud of where we got to. I mean, we got to a much better place than what we had promised before the election. We delivered on that promise. I think there were some comms challenges in the budget. That's what I meant before, that we could have improved the communications of, say, that issue in particular. But when you look at it, man, we're the government that's tipped the most into health of any in the history of New Zealand. We've delivered cancer drugs, 26 new treatments, impacting 175,000 Kiwis. Big investment, but the right thing to do.
Your housing allowance, presumably you wouldn't have applied for it in the first place, so you wouldn't have had to pay it back?
Yeah, all that sort of stuff. But I moved on that pretty quickly. I didn't want that to be a distraction, and that's the reality of stuff. But the big blocks and the big things that we've got to get right for the future of the country, given the turnaround that's desperately needed, I'm very satisfied with.
What about the actual coalition agreement that you've got? There's a lot in there. If you could turn back time and renegotiate it, would there be anything that you'd negotiate differently?
Well, I don't think there's any value in that sort of exercise, because that's purely, the reality is we went into that eyes wide open, knowing that we have an MMP system, as I keep saying. It is maturing, it requires compromise, and what I am proud about is that we did that part of it differently too, and that's given the government tremendous solidity. You look at other coalition governments in recent times and you haven't got the parties actually even talking to each other. They're communicating formally through written text and letters and all that stuff, and through staff rather than through the leaders. We actually did, you have to sign on to the national agenda. We did individual deals with each party, and then each party signs each other's agreements, and so therefore there is no ambiguity that what we're doing, and that's given huge solidity and clarity to the coalition government on that we've got a work plan and a work program, coupled with the goals and the quarterly action plans. The public service and the government and the ministers have tremendous clarity about what we're there to do.
Did you misjudge the treaty principles bill though?
No, I knew that was going to be difficult. It was something that we opposed, as I said, on the other side before the election. But equally, ACT has a constituency. They have, that was a very strong issue for them. They have a very different position from us, obviously. And they didn't get what we want, as I've said, and I didn't get what I wanted, and we came to a compromise.
Chris Finlayson says that Sir John Key would never have signed up to it. He would have steered David Seymour down. Well, very different political situation, and I would disagree. I mean, no disrespect to Chris Finlayson, who I respect a lot, but each leader faces a different set of challenges, and 2008 is very different from 2023. Was it worth it? When you look at the protest out on the forecourt, when you look at the angst, the feeling about it, everything that's played out, was it worth it to form a government, signing up to that?
Well, again, I'm just being pragmatic about it. The New Zealand people have selected MMP as their electoral system. You've got to understand MMP and go look at Western Europe and understand the maturity of MMP. And so we have to be quite mature, pragmatic and grown up about it. The public vote, that's why we talk about party votes and election campaigns, and vote for us if you want us in it and you want us to drive it more, then vote more for us. But whether it's a Labour, Te Pāti Māori or Greens coalition agreement, or whether it was a New Zealand First ACT or national one, there are compromises and trade-offs that are required. So it's just being the reality of it. The good thing is that I think the public play back consistently to us. They like this government. They see it as being coherent. They see it as being coordinated, well led, using the talents that are in that team. And we have good mechanisms for dealing with tensions inside. But our public presentation is we're very agreed on much of it. There are differences, as you've seen, on treaty principles bill, and that's okay. That's quite okay.
And you say it's divisive. You say that it causes division. Seeing that division play out, do you think it's still been worthwhile signing up to that first reading to be able to form a coalition?
Yeah, because it's part of actually being the reality of being a political leader in a coalition, in an MMP environment that requires coalition governments. You have to do deals, you have to do compromises, you have to do trade-offs. It's naive, I think, to think otherwise. If the New Zealand people delivered an election result, and then we are charged to make that work and form a government. And from our point of view, our position was very clear. We got to a compromise. I didn't get what I wanted. Certainly, ACT didn't get what they wanted, but we came to a compromise. And that is the reality. When I talk to former leader Mark Rutte from the Netherlands, they've got a 4-party coalition at the moment. You talk about what's happened in Germany with a 3-party coalition. It's quite normal, right? I
mean, you say it's normal, but it's not normal in New Zealand. I mean, this is the first 3-way coalition government. Can I ask you, who's been more difficult to work with, David Seymour or Winston Peters? No,
actually they've both been great to work with, genuinely so. And I think the way we've gone about building relationships and then working through content and issues together has actually been very good. Like even within the National Party, there are different personalities within our own cabinet and caucus. We can be very united while acknowledging we've got different personalities, different experiences, different views. And I've enjoyed working with both of them. They're different personalities, and the way that we work together is different. But it's been, I think, very successful.
In 6 months' time or so, we'll have that handover. David Seymour will become Deputy Prime Minister, taking over from Winston Peters. Do you anticipate any difficulty with that transition?
No. You've got to understand the dynamic we have.
It'll happen around the same time as the Treaty Principles Bill's second reading.
I get you're projecting onto that question as if that's not going to be successful. I'm just saying to you, as you did probably as a media group at the beginning when this first government was formed, how will this kind of work? Will this work with these three personalities and the three parties? And we've made it work. In the same way we've brought the National Party together earlier in opposition, the same way we've put a coalition government together. We have coalition agreements that are very detailed, very specific. We have parties that have signed off on each other's coalition agreements so that we've got solidity and there's no surprises. And it's highly functions really well. We have our conversations and our tensions and our clearinghouse meetings, as we call them, inside to process any tensions or any differences on issues that are coming at us so that we can get aligned around that.
Will you expect David Seymour to rein in any of his rhetoric when he takes on that new role? Obviously, he's not been afraid so far this term to take a whack at National on occasion. Well, there's a point when we have formal agree to disagree provisions, and we're quite comfortable out there. There's been no dramas and screaming, shouting, ranting, or raving. We don't run that way. It's a pretty calm sort of show and consistent show. He has called your actions anti-democratic publicly. He's questioned National's position and said...
In what way? Sorry, what examples?
Well, he said that you were anti-democratic to rule out supporting the Treaty Principles Bill.
Oh, sure, but we got differences on that, and that's fine. And as I said to you from day one...
Okay, for him to say that you're anti-democratic?
I disagree with him completely on it, and that's quite fine for us to say that. I'm just trying to help, I guess, everyone understand the maturity of MMP. That is the system New Zealand has asked for.
But is that mature? If
I sit in Western Europe, there will be political leaders in coalition governments expressing their views all the time. That is how it works in Western Europe. That's the same system we've chosen here in New Zealand, and it's maturing. You've got parties that have got very distinct positions. You think about all the 6 parties in Parliament. They've all got very distinct positions and constituents of support that represent all of New Zealand ultimately here in the Parliament. And so I appreciate there will be differences, but I just say to you, I think this has been a pretty coherent coalition government.
There is a risk in that though, isn't there? When you allow ACT and New Zealand First such freedom to express their views in their own way, that they are perceived as pulling the strings. So how do you manage that risk as the largest?
Well, I disagree. I think that's not what New Zealanders would say about this coalition government, what they play back to us, which is that they actually, for all the scepticism that the media and others were suggesting on the formation of this government, none of that has proven to be true. I just say to you, go back and look at the history of other coalition governments in New Zealand, look at the quality of the relationship between the coalition parties that were in those governments, and I just say to you, a year down the road, we're in good shape. And we have massive agreement on a large majority of our program, around the economy, around law and order, around public services. Yes, we will have differences on other issues. That's okay. We have mechanisms to handle it, but we just have to get used, as I said, right from day one. There will be different expressions of how people express their views, and that's okay.
But the Act itself says that it has a disproportionate influence on this coalition. Do you agree with that?
No, I think it's got a fair influence, and I think we've navigated it very well.
Is this a national-led coalition, or is it, do the 3 parties have equal voices? How does that work?
Well, I've set it up as a coalition government, and you hear my language is always about a coalition government because I want to use the talents that I have within the National cabinet. Obviously, we have outstanding ministers from National. We've got the vast majority of the ministries, which would be expected given on our vote, and we've come to use the talents that exist in the other 2 parties as well.
So, do the parties have equal voices?
No, not all parties are equal because of our vote shares are different, but we make that work within the constructs of the way that we've set up our coalition arrangements over the way we work together.
I'd like to do a stock take of sorts now,
yeah.
Beginning with the economy. Heading into the government, you named the cost of living crisis as the number 1 priority. Obviously, inflation is now back down at 2.2%. A year ago, it was at 5.6%. Why should we thank the government for that as opposed to the Reserve Bank?
No, I want to be really clear. The last Labor government was a disaster economically. They were economically illiterate and frankly economic vandals. They forgot the lessons of economics, and there are immutable laws on economics. And I talked to the media when I became the leader of the National Party. I remember standing up there and saying to you guys, hey, listen, there's amber lights on the dashboard here, adjust, 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 so we don't have to deal with the consequences of inflation back in an economy. And the reality is this, when you have fiscal policy where a government increased spending by 84%, that drove up inflation, it drove up 12 interest rate rises, that then put the economy into recession, and that then ultimately leads to people laying off jobs. And the job layoffs are the last things that happen because businesses hang in there with high costs around inflation, high costs around interest rates, a recession, suppressed demand, and then ultimately they're forced into a very difficult place of laying people off. And we've seen some of that actually in the last 3 to 4 months. That is the lag effect of the mismanagement. And if you care about working people, you are a fiscal conservative, because the pain and suffering that comes on the back of that is what we've seen with this Labour experiment for the last 6 years. So they took the keys to the car and they drove it full bore into a big ditch, and we're now hauling it out of the ditch and getting it turned up the right way and getting into first and second gear. So you have to have fiscal policy and financial discipline matching with monetary policy, not one where the foot's on the accelerator on fiscal policy, spraying money around as it was under Robertson and Ardern and Hipkins, and then equally the Reserve Bank trying to take interest rates up, causing that instability. And you need, as the Reserve Bank Governor says, good mates fiscally, and that's what we've done.
You mentioned working people. Can you explain to me why you should not, for the exact same reason you spell out when you talk about fiscal policy, also be blamed for the unemployment rate, which we've seen a year ago it was at 3.9%, now it's at 4.8%, 30,000 more people unemployed.
Yeah, tough times and a consequence of Labour mismanagement. And I want you to be really clear about it, because we learned these economic lessons 35 years ago, and this generation of media, of politicians, is having to relearn it, which is that spending drives inflation, which drives interest rates, which drives growth, which drives ultimately employment. And those 5 things are very linked and they're sequential. And so what we've done is got the spending under control. We've got interest rates back within the band, first time in 3.5 years, back at 2.2%. We've had 2 rate cuts, hopefully another one at the end of this week and next week. Then we've also got confidence rising, but we now need to see that translate into growth, into jobs.
But
so cost of living is about inflation and interest rates. Growth and jobs is what we've got to work on next.
But do you own that? Do you own that the decisions you've made have resulted in unemployment going up?
No, I disagree. Unemployment.
Well, how can you claim both? How can you claim that, your argument is effectively that you've brought back inflation by cooling the economy via fiscal policy, but that has also resulted in higher unemployment?
Because you've got a sequential effect where if you're a business owner, and I've come from a business world, you can hang out there for a long time while you've got costs going through the roof, up 30%. You can hang out while you've got interest rates going through the roof. You can hang out for a little bit while you've actually got demand suppressed because people aren't spending money in the economy because their interest rates have meant they haven't got cash to spend at cafes or at restaurants or at shops because they're having to pay more into their mortgages or into their rents or dealing with food prices or gas prices or whatever it is. And ultimately those businesses end up having to face some very ugly, difficult choices. And that's why when I came into the leadership of the National Party, I was saying at that time, hang on people, you need to understand economics and the immutable laws of economics, which is if you do not control inflation, as we've seen all around the world, it causes huge pain and suffering, ultimately in unemployment and recession.
It's tough out there though, right? The brain drain is back. We've seen 130,000 Kiwis heading abroad. How much of that falls on you?
Well, my job is to make sure that I build out an opportunity society where people actually think there is an opportunity for them to do well here in New Zealand. And we've had periods in time where obviously we've had negative net migration. And this is a difficult time. There's no doubt about it. It's a tough time. And that's why I keep saying good economic management, which may not sound particularly sexy and it's quite hard to do, but because it requires discipline and daily practice, is actually really important. So what we have to do is make sure we rebuild the economy so people feel if I work hard, I can actually get ahead. We need to make sure that those young people actually can see that their kids are going to get a world-class education, have a future that is comparable to what their counterparts are experiencing in other countries that we look at around the world. They need to know that they can access healthcare for themselves and for their parents when they need it in this country, and they're going to feel safe with lower levels of crime. And that's why our mantra has been pretty simple, because if we do those things, that is where New Zealanders will say, hey, listen, I see a huge opportunity for my future here in New Zealand.
So let's throw forward for a moment, because the Crown accounts are predicted to get much worse. Remind me when you intend to get back to surplus?
Again, we'll have more to say about that as Haifu comes out before Christmas.
Do you remain committed to 27-28?
Again, we'll have more to say when we see the forecasts and the latest updates coming forward.
Do you accept that if you are to get back to surplus by then, you will need to make severely deep cuts? Or raise revenue somewhere else?
No, what we've got to do is grow our economy, and that's what we have to do. And that's what we are doing, is we're putting in place the conditions for future growth. New Zealand has exceptional potential. That's what actually motivates me more than ever. I feel incredibly optimistic about it. You've only got to go out in the world and realise we've got so much great natural advantage in the Indo-Pacific region, fastest growing part of the world, that want New Zealand products and services. Massive opportunity with abundant natural resources, so therefore we shouldn't have an energy security policy problem or energy security problem thanks to the last government. We do this year, but we've got to be able to fix that. We've got to make sure that we've got good social democratic institutions. When you look at the health of democracies around the world, we're in good shape. And finally, when you look at we've got good people. So there's no reason why we can't build the best country on planet Earth, period.
To be clear though, you're not giving me a commitment that you'll get back to surplus 27-28.
Well, again, I'm just conscious that we've got Heifu coming out in a few weeks, and it would be inappropriate for me to comment on that.
But that's been a commitment in the past.
When we see the forecasts, we'll talk more about that.
Next year's budget, will it be a case of one in, one out in terms of policies? So will you be telling your ministers, if you want more money, you're going to have to get rid of something else?
Well, we just expect good financial discipline. We've got some good examples. For example, if you look at corrections, where there's a range of rehabilitation programs, some of them work, some of them don't. The CEO and the executive team there have done an exceptionally good job, I think, of actually saying, hey, listen, we want to do more of the stuff that works and less of the stuff that doesn't. And I think that's an odd thing coming from outside politics into government is, there's a mentality here in the Beltway and the bubble that the budget is the incremental money that you add on to all the other money you've received. And in any other world, if you're a business person, a small business person across New Zealand, you look at your total spend and you say, is it working for me? And just because we've always done it that way doesn't mean that we're getting good value for their money. And that's the reality of it. How on earth do you spend 84% more money and we have nothing to show for it? That's the Labour experience. So they spent more, borrowed more, taxed more, it didn't work. And so the question is, you have to make sure that the spending is good value for money and it's getting results for New Zealanders.
Let's talk crime for a second. You also talked about, or you campaigned on restoring law and order. Do you think people feel safer in the streets today, a year on?
I think people can see that it's improving. I think when you see that the growth in gang membership went up 50%, it's going up, I think, 1% in the last year. Last night we had our new gang laws hit force. That's great. We want to really hurt the gangs big time. And why? You
mentioned gangs, though. I mean, they've gone up by 200. There are 200 more gang members than there were.
Just put it to you, Craig. When gang membership doubled, and there was a 50% increase, went from 4,000 to 8,000 gang members, I think, over the period of the Labor government. We've had a 1% growth.
We've got our laws was after there was a purge as well, right? They purged a whole lot of names off that list.
I just say you'd be insane to argue, mate, that there is that was a great record from the Labor government on gangs.
No, that's not my argument. My argument is that the record isn't.
I'd just say to you, we've stabilised gang growth, but more importantly, what we're interested in is actually seeing a reduction in crime. And when you start to see the trend that we've arrested, we had a 33% growth in violent crime, 50% growth in gang membership. We had a doubling of retail crime. We had a fourfold increase in ram raids. And if you look at the record already, we've been able to put beat police out. We've got our gang disruption units in place. We've got our new laws in place, giving police more powers. You've seen the smashing up of the Comancheros, you've seen ripping into the mongrel mob in Opotiki, all good stuff, right? Why? Because 1/4% of New Zealand in gangs drives 20 to 25% out of violent crime. We want to reduce violent crime. So problem definition, who's the problem? Gangs, good part of it. There's other parts of it, but a good part of it. Go after them hard.
By your own stats though, theft is up considerably. Other crime has barely budged. You've seen a 3% drop in victimisations. I mean,
isn't that great?
Well, is it a success?
Well, it's a start, isn't it? It's better than where we were heading under the previous lot.
What happens if in a year time that's up again?
Well, that's speculative, isn't it? We're working really hard. We've got a new commissioner, we've got a police minister who's very focused, we've got justice ministers. We're doing everything we can around gangs, around serious young offenders, around sentencing laws, but
I'm asking
500
about
more police officers coming.
So it's accountability. So you've celebrated the stats coming down 3%. What happens if they go up?
Well, we're very transparent about that. I'm unique in the sense of I've declared 9 better public service targets that I report on every quarter. Some go up, some go down, but I talk about what we're trying to achieve. I then meet with the CEOs and the ministers to say, well, what else can we do about those things? When you have 4 out of 5 of kids in New Zealand going into high school not at the standard of maths that they're at, we get that information within a week, which is different. I'm trying to give you an insight about how we do it differently, because other governments would have just waffled their way through a problem like that. As Chris Hipkins was Education Minister for 5.5 years, and every single education outcome went backwards. You need to hold them accountable for that. What we're doing is something different, which is saying, let's do something different and try, because the New Zealand public want us to try.
And my question was about accountability. So what will happen if those stats go up again?
I'll be very accountable about it. I don't have a problem with accountability,
Mark Mitchell to go?
I've got it. He is outstanding as a police minister. Look at his record already. Go look at what's happened in Auckland CBD around crime. Understand what he's done, bringing those agencies together, getting the beat police out and about, seeing a reduction in crime after years of that just constantly getting worse and worse and worse.
You also pledged to boost police numbers
yes.
by 500 over 2 years. Yep. You were at the halfway mark. How much progress have you made?
We've got more to do. It's going to be pretty challenging, but we're going to do it. What's happening is...
Do you know the numbers?
Police attrition's down to about 4.6%, which is what it's been for the last decade. We've got record numbers of people recruiting to the police. In fact, next year we're going to expand the recruitment wings out to 100. They've typically been 70. I've been out to the police college. I've had dinner with the young recruits actually on Friday. Met at different stages in their recruitment wings. So that's tough and challenging, but we'll get it done. We're going to work hard at it.
As of this week, the current count is 10,159, which is 52 fewer officers than when you took office.
Yep, and we've made a commitment that we'll get that sorted in the time frame that we talked about.
But you're going to get it done in a year?
Well, we're working hard at it.
You've gone backwards.
No, I'll just say to you, compared to where we started and to where we are today, we're making progress. And so, judge me by the results when we get there.
So you are confident that in a year's time, you will have made those 500 extra police?
We're going to work really hard to make that a reality. We know it's a stretching goal, but we know it's going to work. We know we're getting more recruitment. We've got happier police because they've got a government backed by them, as evidenced by them not leaving the police force.
More recruitment. It's not going to be enough to get there, is it?
It will be. We've got a plan and we're going to deliver it.
National also campaigned on fixing the housing crisis. Chris Bishop, the Housing Minister, has said very frankly that he wants the average house price to fall. Is that the government's position?
Yeah, well, we want to see much more affordable housing. What I'm pleased about in housing is that, we have talked for a decade about the state of emergency housing in this country. And, I would encourage you as media, think about what we've achieved in the space of a very short period of time. We've taken a huge number of families out of emergency housing and put them into proper homes. That is because we've actively managed the cohort of people that are in those houses, because we don't think it's right that kids should be living in motels for a year rather than being in a house.
Sure,
and so
coming back to the question though, is it the government's policy to bring down house prices?
Well, we're happy with house prices coming down because essentially that means that our job, to be honest, is to make sure we've got an abundant supply of houses being developed, because it's perverse. It takes 19 months to build a standard house in New Zealand, 50% more than Australia, and then we have very high housing prices. So we've got a supply problem in this country. That means that we open up the supply so we can get houses built quicker and easier. You're seeing us do practical things in the building and construction world of less inspections, self-certification of builders, make sure we can do inspections virtually, make sure that we can actually build 60-metre square granny houses without resource consenting, looking at the building consent authorities, of which we have, I think, 82 in this country. For a small country, that's insane. Make sure that we get the things that are adding the cost and the complexity that means that people are paying more for houses than they actually should. If we get a supply of houses in the market, that means that people can own. It also creates a supply of houses in the rental market. What's been impressive is, there has not been a rental increase in the time that we've been in government. There was $180 a week under the last lot. Why? Because landlord interest deductibility, bright line test, the balance of tenant versus landlord rights, we've fixed that up so that the incentives are right to create a supply of rental property available. And you haven't seen rent prices go up over the period of our government. Likewise on social and state housing, we're making good progress in that, but we're having to work really hard at it to get people out of emergency housing into social housing, either with community housing providers, and we're having to fix up KO at the same time.
Prime Minister, thank you for sitting down with us.
Pleasure, good to be with you.